I have the pleasure of speaking with Dina Otero. She is the VP of Demand Gen over at Mission. Hi, Dina.
Hi, Janelle. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah. We've been talking on LinkedIn and slacking back and forth through all of the communities that we're both a part of, and it's about time to meet in real life. So I'm glad. Yes, very overdue.
We're fangirling all over LinkedIn. I appreciate it. So let's start off. For anybody who's unfamiliar with you or with Mission, can you just give us like kind of a quick rundown of you, your role, Mission?
Sure. So as Janelle mentioned, I am the Vice President of Demand Gen at Mission. We are an AWS Premier Tier partner, so we are fully experts in all things AWS, so cloud services, migration, modernization, and more recently, obviously, AI.
AI. We need to dive into that topic too.
I'm sure we will.
What are some of the key responsibilities you have over there?
So my team and myself are all responsible for growing our company's pipeline regarding all things just marketing attribution. So that's from our field events, our conferences that we sponsor, digital marketing, and content syndication and webinars. All of these, what I'm calling tactics at the moment, into a more strategic omnichannel go-to-market strategy.
The topic of attribution.
Yes, exactly.
So before this, we were kind of thinking on some topics to really dive into the weeds for this podcast. And one of the things that you mentioned you're currently going through over at Mission is transitioning from a lead model to an account model. Mm-hmm. Let's talk more about that strategy and how you're thinking about attribution as you go about that.
Yeah, so it's been a very interesting journey. So I joined Mission just a little over a year ago at this point, and for cloud, which is obviously a very modern and important part of like this tech industry that is continuously innovating, a lot of the companies that support cloud is not keeping up the ways that, say, SaaS companies do. So a lot of the ways that we were marketing, or I should say reporting on our marketing, was quite antiquated. And so we are still sitting on a lead model at the moment, tracking, leads generated, looking at first touch, like lead sources. I kind of want to roll my eyes a little bit, but it's the reality of the situation.
It's the reality for a lot of companies, honestly.
Yeah. So it's been great though, because it's been a humbling experience to be like, okay, well, Mission was a startup. They're not anymore. We are growing quite rapidly. And it was this growing pain where it worked 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's not working anymore. And now, that was one of the main reasons I was brought in, was how do we look at not just our reporting and our funnel numbers and our funnel metrics and our KPIs, but our entire marketing go-to-market strategy as a whole. And one of the things that I was trying to fix from an efficiency and operational standpoint was making sure that we are able to track the entire customer lifecycle, not just the quote-unquote handoff from marketing to sales. And while we still have some work to do, we've made a lot of progress in the last year. But I feel like now we're at a place where we can really elevate the marketing side and move from lead to accounts.
I love that. Thank you for that background. How did you go about doing that conversation with the rest of the executive team? Were they already bought in? Did you have to do some buy-in presentations? Was everybody just ready to make that transition?
It's actually, it's still a work in progress, but everyone seems to be bought in. And the reason I mention that is we already speak about customers and our prospects at the account level. We're not talking about John Smith at ABC Company. We're talking about ABC Company and the people that we already have a relationship with at ABC Company and other divisions within ABC Company we could potentially be growing into. So naturally, it's actually already happening. It's just on paper, we weren't tracking it that way.
How have you advised your team on the targeting standpoint, transitioning from lead to more account focused?
So 6sense actually is a big component of that. So we've had the platform before I joined, but we've been just working with the base platform. So the keyword tracking, some of the basic intent signals, but most recently we've implemented the predictive model. And that's going to basically really jumpstart our account movement, because now we can track 6 QAs instead of just leads generated. So basically swapping out the leads generated and MQLs with contacts within accounts that are more engaged. And so looking at the account level and all the different like activities and engagement that might be happening across the account. So it's not just, Janelle at this company joined our webinar. It's, well, Janelle joined, but also her colleagues met our team at a conference, and there were 6 other people who engaged in some way. So it was really looking at all of the attribution across the different engagements, not just the one person doing the one thing.
That makes sense. Curious, do you guys have an SDR or BDR team?
We do. We call them cloud advisors.
Okay, cloud advisors.
They roll up to my team as well. And that was actually another really good example of where we've been seeing a little bit of the disconnect, which is why lead model just does not work. So our cloud advisors are really diligent about following up with any potential prospect that, again, from our traditional lead scoring model has been flagged, whether it's inbound or they're working target accounts. And in a lot of cases, our sales team are also working those target accounts, and then they would have a meeting scheduled with somebody, but it would not be the exact person that our cloud advisors were targeting. And so while the win is there, we still wanted, our foot in the door in that account. We wanted a meeting scheduled that will ultimately turn into like a qualified opportunity. That's a win, but marketing's contribution to that account is getting lost because the person that the salesperson, the AE, booked a meeting was not the same. So now it just becomes a sales lead, which is not a big deal from it's not about taking credit. It's more about just showing how complex these sales cycles truly are. Totally. And it's never just any one person in a buying committee making a decision. It's literally a decision by committee.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So your cloud advisors, how do you guys go about the different roles and responsibilities? So obviously you're talking about moving from lead to an account-based model, and with that you start with the target account list, and most companies, correct me if this is incorrect at your company, take that target account list and divide some of the activities: marketing, air cover, sales, SDR, cloud advisors, doing more on the outreach and prospecting type of things. How have you defined those roles, or have you yet, because you're kind of in the process of this?
Yes, we do have marketing air cover on all of our account lists, especially if we know that they're current AWS users, because that will help us identify what kind of approach or messaging we're going to go with. So from a company, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, we're a managed service provider, and we have a lot of project-based services, like professional services. So we support a lot of our AWS customers with, say, migration plays, but there's also all sorts of other ad hoc projects and other initiatives. So if we know they're a current AWS partner, AWS customer, that changes the message that we go out with. It's not migration, they're already a customer. It's how do we then help them invest in their AWS infrastructure to ensure that they're meeting business objectives and they're staying in budget and they can run their workloads more efficiently and getting the analytics that they need, and the security is there. So it's all of these additional features and functionality that's super critical that helps grow their reliance on AWS, and also their support internally on operating at a company that is secure.
Yeah, and that makes total sense to ensure that you're still supporting that journey even while they're a customer, and making sure that you're actually thinking about that part of the funnel, because some companies, depending on how fast they want to scale, right, sometimes they forget about those. They just want to do the net new business, and they don't always look at the churn rates or the retention rates. And so I think that's a really important strategy, not only obviously for you, but everybody else and the listeners for this podcast, is to just make sure that we're truly thinking full funnel, and that means all the way down to acquiring a customer and keeping a customer. Mm-hmm. And I think you're obviously doing it right there over at Mission. Pivoting, she said, yeah. She said, yeah.
If I say so myself.
Yeah, well, that's what this podcast is all about, is to just have some great guests to just fangirl over. So I absolutely love it. Let's pivot a little bit more into 2025. We're in Q4, planning, budgeting, all those great conversations. What are some of the favorite strategies that you're going to roll over into 2025?
So, like I mentioned, the account-based movement is still very much a work in progress. So, ultimately finishing that. Realistically, we probably won't get that fully rolled out until Q1, so that's going to be a big factor into what our execution and plan is going to look like for the rest of the year. Beyond that, increasing our personalization. And so this is something that I'm really excited about after this week, because while we are already using conversational email, okay, I'm going to have to like do a little humble brag here for a moment, but Mission Cloud has been named a finalist for Efficiency Experts. It's a breakthrough award. Yeah. So, and it was because of our use of conversational email, but we are still just scratching the surface with it, quite frankly. We're using it right now for all of our event follow-up. We haven't really been using it for our outbound prospecting. I mentioned that we just launched our predictive model, so the 6QA data is still really new and fresh. So executing on all of the outbound prospecting for new 6QAs is something that I absolutely want to get off the ground really early in the year, or probably hopefully sooner than that. And then more importantly, we close out every single year with our biggest event of the year. So while it's not our hosted event, we are a big sponsor of AWS reInvent, and it is the first week of December. But we also do a lot of ancillary events throughout that conference. So we have our huge Ignite party, where we are hosting a Women in Tech luncheon, and it's the biggest generator of prospects for us, and it's the biggest line item in our budget, but we get the ROI back on it. So it's really about being very diligent and very strategic with the follow-up, to ensure that not only is it timely, but making sure that the response and the follow-up is in line with what people were talking about at that conference. So it's not just a spray and pray email and be like, hey, let's have a meeting. No, it's, hey, you met with James at our booth and you guys were talking about some potential data processing Gen AI use cases. Like, here's some resources that we have on data processing or intelligent data processing, and some customers that have had really good success with it. And then so using that personalized outreach to then get the meeting booked, to then qualify that opportunity, to then bring in that customer, and ultimately meet our ROI goals.
Yeah, that sounds like a super sophisticated and smart strategy. So I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that with me. What are some challenges that you faced so far transitioning from a lead model over to the account-based?
We are a small team. So it's really about it's the shifting of priorities. So I always like to use my analogy of we need to keep the plane flying while fixing it. So it's getting all of our operations, our workflows, our infrastructure in place while still doing our day-to-day job. Like, we still have targets that we have to hit. We have a big Q4 that needs to be closed and closed strong. And ultimately, it's how do we balance all of the actual tactics that need to happen to move and do the rollout and the enablement and ensure that there's adoption and understanding of how reporting will shift during the rollout of an account model, while still showcasing that, we have our always on campaigns that are still performing, that we are still hitting our pipeline goals. The cloud advisors are still able to get into the accounts and connect with people that they need to be connecting with. So it's making sure that things are not breaking in the midst of everyone still doing their job, but also try to make progress as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I love that. It's building the plane while fixing it. Yeah. I've heard building the plane while flying it, but this time we're fixing it.
Oh, did I say that? I meant to say fixing the plane while flying it.
Building the plane, fixing the plane.
Fixing the plane.
Fixing the plane.
It's at least flying. We're above it. We're above ground.
We departed.
Yeah.
We're up. So with the conversations with executives, you mentioned that you guys still have goals to meet. So you're trying to balance the priorities with your team on prioritizing the movement from leads to accounts, but also still actively working on hitting these goals. What kind of conversations, let's do like an Insights Unleashed little like mini series here. What kind of conversations were you having with executives about how you're still hitting these KPIs while doing this big movement?
Yeah, ultimately luckily executives all want one thing. It's, are we hitting our revenue targets? And if not, do we have the pipeline to meet it? And so marketing is very big on measuring pipeline and measuring pipeline contribution. So that's something that will never change. We're still going to be measuring that. It's obviously how we continue to attribute that revenue. So before it was literally just opportunities sourced, where now it's going to be a combination of sourced and influenced. So the numbers are just going to be increasing because we were excluding all of the influenced opportunities beforehand. So showcasing that we are still seeing increases month over month, week over week to hit those pipeline goals, so then sales can ultimately hit their revenue or booking deals. But also explaining that it's not that we're just trying to make it seem like we're doing more. It's showing as to why the business is changing and how the buying process is changing and why this change makes sense for where we are today. We never want to make it seem like we're just trying to fluff up the numbers to make ourselves look good. So everything that we do showcase, we can always go back and pinpoint exactly what and where an account or a specific person did to show that this is in fact attributed or contributed by marketing in some way.
Is that through a model, or do you guys go through and like manually track that?
It's
and, like,
manual.
create it?
Yeah. So right now it's very manual. But we, again, because a lot of our contacts are tied to lists, and because it's a contact, we can tie it back to the account. It's not an ideal way at the moment, but it is trackable. So it is we are able to go back and look. The other thing, which I'm very grateful for, is especially with events, our sales team are so intrigued with events. They love working events. They see the value. We get the ROI on them. And they know that those are always coming out of marketing budget. So those are a very cut and dry way that even if they met specific folks at an event, whether it was something that we hosted or like a trade show that we sponsored, even if they then get introduced to other individuals within that company, and they know that that company, the only reason they have meetings with that company is because it came from the event, they will always tie the opportunity back to the event.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, so it's okay. And we've had a ton of customers grow that way. And so, as of right now, the event channel is actually our best performing. And so and I think that kind of goes back to the fact that our AEs are so in tune with how events work and the budget that they're coming from, that they're always willing to attribute the opportunity and the revenue back to events and
that's
marketing.
awesome, because not all companies have that level of accountability with the sales team, so that's really awesome. And even though it's manual, it's important nonetheless. So I can always appreciate the manual rolling up the sleeves, like getting it done type of mentality. So I love that. I think it's so important. And I take a similar approach too on my end of the business, where if we need to, we'll extract it from a manual standpoint and literally map out in a blank piece of paper what that buyer's journey is and how many touch points and the buying committee, because all of that, as we know, is not linear. It's not a one touch, isn't right? So just kudos to you for already being ahead of that and advocating to your team to be pulling this type of metrics and advocating for that on the executive side of things.
I appreciate it. It's also so important from a budget perspective. I mean, we get questioned just like anybody else all the time on, are we spending money in the right places? And while I don't necessarily love doing the manual reporting, I am also very, very data driven, and so I want to make sure that I am allocating my budget to the right channels, and I also want to make sure that where we're spending our time is actually going to give us some kind of return. I mentioned this before, we're not a huge team, so I want to make sure that we are investing in the things that are going to matter, and if that means I have to do it on a manual basis for now, I'm willing to do it because it's going to give me I'm more confident with my decisions versus just kind of throwing a dart at the board and be like, sure, let's just try this. Why not? And then we lose a whole quarter and, $30,000. That's just not an option at the moment.
I love that. We have time for one more question, so I want to pick your brain on something.
Okay, go for it.
What is your one do and your one don't for demand gen marketers and go-to-market leaders as we approach 2025?
I think I just said my don't. Don't throw a dart at the board.
Do not. Whatever you do.
Challenge the status quo. So I have been with many organizations who are like, events don't work. Why are we doing events? Don't do events. Events don't work. And maybe the way that events have been done traditionally don't work anymore, but that doesn't mean the entire channel is dead. It just means you have to rethink how events and event budget is going to be allocated. And what I mean by that is we don't sponsor 50 conferences throughout the year anymore. 10 years ago, my entire event budget was literally conferences across the entire globe, basically all the sales regions that we supported. That's just not our reality anymore. Not only did COVID change that, the way buyers meet people have changed. People are just more in tune with what they want. So that entire process is a little bit different. I think it's more about the experience. So smaller regional events with 10 people, you bring in your executives, you bring in your key prospects, your key customers. You have very specific objectives of what you want that event to be. It's intimate, and depending on who your customers are, it's an experiential event that maybe they're all golfers, maybe they all love NASCAR. I don't know. We sell to a lot of men, so these tend to be like the way our events go, but that's not always the case, obviously. So you work with what works with your customer base, but don't eliminate an entire channel just because somebody thinks it doesn't work. Challenge the question and then think of different ways to make it work. One thing to do is, I also kind of spoke about this too, is it's okay to roll up your sleeves and get in there and have numbers and reports and data to make yourself more confident with your decisions. And if you don't have the numbers in front of you, work with the people who do. Like, reach out to your customer success managers and ask them, what are your customers complaining about? Like, if we don't have, I'm kind of jumping, but like this kind of all ties together, is if we don't have messaging on specific ideas, like ask customer success, what are your customers complaining about, and then try to create a lot of messaging that is like objective messaging to that, to kind of re-educate the space so it doesn't get to a point where a customer could potentially churn. It's not always just about numbers. It's about looking at gaps, and sometimes it's numbers, sometimes it's content, sometimes it's brand. So yeah, look for the gaps.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Dina, so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Demand Gen Made Simple show. If you found value in today's episode, please consider leaving a review, as it really helps me reach more people just like you. And make sure to subscribe so you can be notified when the next episode drops. Thank you, and see you next time.